Welcome, brave souls, to the chilling depths of horror in detail. Today we are going to share scary Wendigo horror stories. First story, the Wendigo. I am writing everything down in this journal to document our journey to Fort Kent and the subsequent events that transpired afterward. I hope that whoever finds this journal will publicize what had happened in this town to us between the dates of January 12th to February 13th, 2018. Do you know of the Fort Kent Wendigo in Alberta, Canada? Most would say it is an urban legend, but after what I have read and experienced, my view has taken 180-degree turn. It all started when myself and a group of 3 friends wanted to make a Bollywood movie about the Wendigo. After spending 2 weeks of researching the Wendigo and what they looked like, I found the Wendigo of Fort Kent. Some say that a doctor locked himself in his house with his dead wife that had just died of smallpox. Then he ate her and turned into the Wendigo. Along with his wife, many of the town's folk died from smallpox. Once the man left his home, he killed and ate the remaining dozen or so residents of the town. No one is really sure about what happened, but there is one fact no one can deny. Fort Kent became a ghost town, and no one really knows why. After finding out all of this information, I knew that we had a great idea for a movie. The only problem was the place was pretty isolated. So if we got into any trouble, it would be days before anyone would be able to help them. Luckily, Bobby's parents were filthy rich. Since they were both plastic surgeons, they spoiled Bobby rotten and gave him everything he wanted. Even so, he was a pretty down-to-earth guy and one of my best friends. Along with Bobby, there was Mike and Kylie. As for myself, the producer of the soon-to-be movie, my name is Tara. So we took off in a small jet, heading from Ottawa, Ontario, Canada, to Elk Point Airport, Alberta. We took a fancy Canon 80D DSLR camera with us to shoot the movie, as well as a portable field mixer, a wireless microphone system, a shotgun microphone and boom pole, wind protection for the mics, a field recorder, and headphones. Along with all of that equipment, we brought camping equipment. When we got to Elk Point Airport, we rented a Hyundai Tucson, loaded it up with all of our equipment, and headed for Bonnyville. Now, it usually takes 45 minutes to an hour to drive to Bonnyville, but we were going in January. They had just gotten 24 cms of snow, and the roads were heavy with snow. It took us 3 hours to get to Bonnyville, where we got groceries and lots of alcohol for our month stay in the ghost town of Fort Kent. For a bit of background, the 4 of us have been friends since elementary and just graduated high school. We decided to take a year off before heading to college and came up with the bright idea of making a horror movie. Bobby's parents had given Bobby the sound equipment and camera as a graduation present. We spent the summer figuring out what we were going to film when we came across the urban legend of the Wendigo of Fort Kent. Since then, we have been obsessed about the film. After we had gotten the essentials needed for our trip to the ghost town, we headed for the fort. January 12th, 2018, Day 1. We arrived in Fort Kent around 2 p.m. It took us 4 hours to set up all the tents and gear. We decided to set up near the outskirts of town. For some reason, we felt more comfortable here. No one said anything, but everyone got more nervous the further we went into town. By the time we were all set up, the sun had already set, and we couldn't see anything past the glow of the bonfire. We decided to drink the night away, talking about all the things we would do once the morning came. Around 10 p.m., we started to notice snowflakes starting to fall. We huddled around the fire more, but when the wind started picking up as well, we decided to call it a night. We had 2 tents set up, one for me and Mike, and the other one for Kylie and Bobby. Mike and I lay on top of a blow-up queen-size mattress that had 3 heavy covers on top of it. The 2 of us got under the blankets and looked up at the ceiling. I could feel Mike trying to get into my pants, but I shrugged him off. This place was giving me a bad vibe, and I wasn't in the mood. The walls of the 8-person tent shook as the wind and snow pummeled against the tent, making it difficult to hear anything. At the time, I didn't think anything of it, but I swore I thought I could hear the howl of a wolf through the sound of the wind. January 13th, 2018, Day 2. I woke up around 6 a.m. this morning to Mike snoring beside me. His arm was draped around me as my eyes slowly opened. The tent was still, and the sound of the wind was silent. I brought my hand up to his arm and pulled it off of me. I rolled off the bed and pulled myself off of the floor. I quickly got dressed. To my surprise, it was warmer inside than I thought it would have been. I put on a parka and toque and opened the flap that led outside. A foot of snow fell into the tent the moment the flap was open. I let out a startled silent meep and jumped back. I looked behind me, wondering if I had awoken Mike. To my relief, he was still snoring away. I composed myself and pulled myself out of the tent and into the snow. The snow crunched under my boots as I walked outside. I stood at 5 foot 8 inches and had the snow reach up to my knees, so overnight we had gotten a fair amount of snow. So it took me by complete surprise when I saw a set of footprints traveling through the snow around our tents. I figured that Bobby must have gotten up during the night and had a smoke. So again, I didn't think much of it. I looked towards the town. 2 rundown houses stood about 100 feet away. Then I looked to my right and saw our rental vehicle completely covered in snow. I spent the next 2 hours cleaning off the vehicle of snow. By the time I had finally gotten it cleaned, the rest of my friends had gotten up and started walking around. Bobby had taken out his camera and started to film the area. The last I had seen him, he was heading into town with Kylie while Mike came over to me. We talked a while about the project we were working on. We didn't have any shovels, so getting the SUV out of the area we were in was very difficult. Eventually, after much effort, we got the SUV out and onto the soft snow. The 4-wheel drive made the situation a little better. We both got into the SUV and drove it through the town. We followed the footprints that seemed to go to each house in the town, until finally the footprints went to a house, and there weren't any footprints coming back out. We parked the SUV on the side of the road, got out, and headed to the house the footprints went to. Turns out, the house had looked like someone had been living in it recently. We found them in the basement. Bobby was filming writing, which was covering every square inch of the basement. On one side of the wall, it read, "Beware the Wendigo." As the writing went along the wall, the writing got more and more messy. By the end, the writing became scratches in the wall. Finally, it read, "I am the Wendigo." We did some more shooting, making an introduction to the movie. By the time 4 p.m. came around, we decided to head back to the campground and pack it in for the night. By the time we got back to camp, it was pitch black outside. We parked the SUV beside the tents, and all 4 of us headed inside mine and Mike's tent. We continued to drink and had a cold dinner from soup cans. We played cards until 10 p.m., right until we heard a howl coming right outside of our tent. We had been talking pretty loudly, so we hadn't heard it approach. We could hear the sound of crunching snow under heavy footprints. Then its shadow cast itself on the tent, and the only thing we could see were its legs. Not only was the creature bipedal, but it was huge. Mike was about to open the flap to check what it was when we heard the sound of metal being torn to pieces. The sound of the car alarm going off as it did. I wanted to scream, but I was too terrified to do so. Soon the sound of metal being torn to shreds stopped, and silence ensued. I was about to let out a sigh of relief when I heard another howl. Then the sound of the other tent being torn to shreds could be heard. After another 5 minutes, the sound faded, and we could hear the creature walking away from our tents. We waited until midnight to get out of our tent and see the damage. The car and tent were destroyed. We had left most of our food in the car, and from what we could see, there was no food left. Kylie started to cry, and Bobby tried to console her, while Mike and I just stood there in shock, wondering what we would do next. Bobby had brought his camera into our tent, but the sound equipment he had been in his tent and was now destroyed as well. We realized that our project was finished and we would have to go back to Bonneville in the morning. We didn't get much sleep that night, and this was only the tip of the iceberg. Our stay in Fort Kent was only just starting. Second story. Does anyone remember this story? I read this story on some horror forum online. God, it must have been 10 years ago now, maybe more. It always stuck with me. I don't know why. It wasn't particularly well written, and the concept has been done to death. But even now, all these years later, I'll catch myself thinking about it. Or I'll see a picture on the wall, and I'll remember. The story went something like this. A guy moves into a house. It's old, has a lot of history. He gets it cheap. So, he gets settled in. Everything is perfect. And then a few weeks later, he discovers there's a woman in one of the paintings on the walls. A woman who wasn't there before. It's a landscape painting. She's wearing some sort of old-fashioned clothing. Maybe Victorian? Probably Victorian. That's how all these stories go. She's got long black hair and pale skin and deep, staring eyes. Looking at her sort of creeps him out. He thinks he just hadn't noticed her before, tries to write it off as the fallibility of the human brain. But then she shows up in other painting. And then in family photos, he starts seeing her in the background. It gets worse when she starts showing up in mirrors. And now the guy's hearing creaks and bumps in the night. Feels like he's being watched, sees things out of place that he can't account for. Finally, he wakes up one day, walks downstairs, and finds images of the woman sketched over every square inch of the walls, and every drawing seems to stare directly at him. It was one of those stories that had a picture with it. It was supposedly one of the walls with the woman sketched over and over on it. The sketching wasn't very good, but there was something unsettling about the picture all the same. Like I said, not the best one out there. We never find out who the woman is or why she's tormenting the poor narrator. We don't know why she suddenly appears on the walls. There's no resolution, and the climax leaves something to be desired. And yet, I'll try to find the story again, but I never could. Maybe the author deleted it. I wish they hadn't. I'd like to see that picture again. A few weeks ago, Mom asked my help in going through some of Great-Grandma's things. We come from a family of pack rats with a strong interest in genealogy, meaning that throughout generations, we've kept and recorded just about everything, squirreling it away to sit untouched in our attics. My mom inherited a lot of these artifacts of our family history from her mother, and since I'm the only one of us children who's shown an interest in our ancestry, I'll inherit them after she dies. So it was in my interest to help her sort through Great-Grandma's things and maybe convince her to get rid of some of the more damaged items if I could. We ended up bringing her photo albums downstairs and spent part of the afternoon just paging through them, Mom pointing out the people she knew, which was most of them. And then we came to this one picture. It wasn't in a sleeve. It had been just tucked between two random pages. It was an old black and white Polaroid of a woman in a long dress. She was staring impassively at the camera, her mouth twisted into a slight frown. She had this beautiful long hair and piercing eyes. Her hands were folded in front of her, and something about her just felt familiar. I asked my mom who she was, but she couldn't place her. There wasn't anything written on the back of the photo to give us a clue. The last time my mom had looked at the album had been years, over a decade, maybe more. She didn't recall ever having seen the picture. Couldn't imagine she would have left it there, out of place as it was. I asked her if I could take it with me, on a whim, and she agreed. I couldn't get that strange sense of familiarity out of my head. It wasn't until I had gotten all the way home and through my front door that it hit me. She looked like the woman in the story. Obviously, there hadn't been any good pictures of the woman in the story. Just drawings. What I mean is that she looked exactly like I'd imagined her, down to the curved wave in her hair and the placement of her hands. That's when I remembered another detail of the story that I'd long forgotten. The woman had her hands clasped in front of her in every picture, but in the drawings on the walls, she was reaching out as if to grab the narrator. I called my mom and told her about the story and the picture. I could tell she thought I was reading too much into things. She's a pretty practical and skeptical person. She did agree to go through great-grandma's writings and papers and see if she could figure out who the woman could be. The next time I spoke to her was at my brother Nathan's memorial. It was just a few days after we found the picture. 10 years ago, Nathan was found in his home, his throat cut. He was only 34. Although the police investigation into his death picked up momentum almost immediately, nobody was ever charged for the crime. Our family has thoughts on who might have done it, but we've never been able to prove anything. We probably never will. Each year on the anniversary of his death, we have a little family gathering to remember and mourn. So we were at Mom's house, looking through old pictures of my brother and remembering. Mom had already told me that she hadn't found any information on the picture we'd found days before. It was about what I had expected. I had decided to just stow the picture away and forget about it when I came across this certain picture of my brother. It was from his housewarming party, taken just a few months before his death. He was standing with his arm around me, and we were both making these stupid faces at the camera. I've looked at that photo thousands of times by now, but this was the first time I really noticed the painting in the background. It was a landscape painting showing rolling hills dotted with trees. And there, standing next to one of the trees, was a figure. I had to squint to make it out, but it looked like a person, a woman. I was distracted for the rest of the memorial. I took the picture with me when I went home, and I just sat there and stared at it, wishing I could see the painting a little better. With that story on my mind and the picture Mom and I had found, it was hard not to connect the dots, even though I was half convinced the dots I was connecting didn't actually exist. Clearly, I was reading too much into it. Nathan's death was hard on me, and I'm always a little off around the anniversary. I was seeing things that weren't there as a way of coping with the fact that my big brother's murderer will probably never face justice for what he did. I put both of the pictures in my bedside drawer and decided to leave well enough alone. Maybe another day when I was feeling more like myself, I'd look at them again. Maybe. Weeks passed by, and gradually my uneasiness faded. It became easier to see it all as a product of my imagination. I've always been the imaginative sort anyway. And then, yesterday, I got up to get dressed for work and walked into the bathroom. As I passed by the mirror, I saw someone else standing in there with me. A woman with dark, wavy hair and piercing eyes, her hands folded primly in front of her. I whirled around, only to find myself alone. When I turned back to the mirror, her image was gone. It was her. I'm sure it was her. I haven't stopped thinking about her since then. Or that story. Was it a story? Did I get all the details right? Maybe she showed up in the mirror first. Was that it? What exactly happened after that? The story ended with her image scrawled all over the walls. But what came after that? Did the person ever write an update? I need to find the author. I need to know if it was who I think it was, and if so, why he didn't tell me what was going on. Is it somewhere in his journals? If you remember this story, please help me find it. Something terrible is about to happen, is already happening to me, and I need answers. And I'm afraid the only one who could give them to me is dead. Third story. My parents imprisoned me for 17 years. During nights when the restraints cut most painfully into my wrists and legs, or when my stomach writhed and twisted like a tormented snake, I allowed myself to drift off into my only happy memory. I was 3 or 4 years old, and I was with my best friend. At that age, children don't really form visual memories, and so my only impression of her is warmth and happiness. I can't tell you the color of her eyes or hair, but I know that we were inseparable and that I loved her. And there's no way to be sure of this, but I like to believe we were at a birthday party, either mine or hers, because there was a sweet taste in my mouth, and from my painfully limited knowledge of these things, it was the taste of cake. When I thought about my only friend, the scuffed walls around me faded away, and the pain in my joints became unimportant enough to ignore, at least temporarily. I know for sure that this memory takes place before my 5th birthday, which is much more clear in my mind. That was the day I began to know something of my situation. Happy birthday, my mother said, glancing up briefly into my face. Her eyes were cold and distant. She was crouched in front of me, checking my restraints, and as she spoke, she tightened them with a vicious tug. Then she stood up and left my room without a backwards glance. I remember sobbing as the door locked behind her, crying for her or for my father, or anyone really to come back. I was so young. I didn't yet understand that the people who called themselves my parents were monsters. It took 12 years before things changed, and by that point I had almost given up. By the age of 8, I knew that not only did my parents not love me, but that they despised me. Childhood innocence and blind trust gave way to sullenness, and then to anger and outright rebellion. I ripped at my restraints until I gouged bloody semicircles in my skin. I spat and swore at my parents as they stabbed me with needles and injected vileness into my veins. I screamed until my throat stung and my voice gave out. My struggles fell on deaf ears. They simply ignored me, kept injecting the stuff that made me feel curiously dull and caused a heavy weight to settle in my stomach. Once out of sheer frustration at his refusal to listen to my pleas, I tried to bite my father as he readied the syringe. He reared back and punched me so hard in the face that my head bounced back against the wall. I woke up with a splitting headache and my vision partially obscured with gauze. My father was hunched in the corner, staring at me. The look in his eyes made me shudder. I called out to him, but my mouth wouldn't open. They'd wired my jaw shut. That contraption stayed on for a year, night and day, combined with more restraints. It didn't matter that I couldn't eat or drink. That was all taken care of, thanks to the miserable sludge injected into my veins 3 times a day. I grew accustomed to the gag and to not being able to speak, and when they finally took it off, I didn't even care. Things changed because of Dad. He and my mother were an odd couple. She small and intense, he large and morose. I always had the impression, even though he had hit me, that he was somewhat kinder, if you could even apply such adjectives to people like my parents. I heard his raised voice one day, over the drone of my small TV. I had awoken to find it in my room, not long after the gag had been put on. A remote control lay near my fingers. It must have been a gift from Dad, a sort of apology, because I know Mom didn't approve of it. Stupid to put ideas in her head. I heard her mutter to herself the first time she saw it. Dad showed me how to operate the remote. The TV was old and only showed 3 channels: a cooking show, a news report, and a colorful cartoon. But by that point, I was so drained and broken that I could barely focus on the flickering images. I preferred to gaze at the static, my ears numbed by the hissing and my mind's eye conjuring up endless snow. A snowy field where my friend and I rolled and jumped and played together. I could almost feel the cold flakes on my skin when Dad's voice cut through the static and jerked me into wakefulness. In all the time I'd known him, he had never raised his voice. But now I could hear his shouting faintly through the heavy door. "I won't allow you to do it to her." "No, she's already suffered enough." Mom's reply was too faint to hear. "I don't care. What sort of life are we giving her anyway?" Again there came a pause. Then Dad spoke again, his voice quieter and choked with bitterness. I strained to hear him clearly. "You've done enough to her already. I suppose you may as well kill her and get it over with." Silence, then a crash. A door slammed somewhere in the recesses of the house I'd never seen. My heart thudded painfully. My torture had become mundane for them. I wasn't dying quickly enough. With the knowledge that they were going to kill me, my will to live came surging back. Later that day, Dad came into the room to give me dinner. I looked directly into his eyes and forced my lips into a smile. He paused in the entryway, then gave me a small smile in return. I allowed myself to feel the slightest hope. "Hey, Dad, what's up?" The words came out more harshly than I'd intended. I hadn't spoken for over a year. He began to slide the needle into my forearm. "It's nice to hear your voice again," he said as he depressed the plunger. I know I've been difficult for you and Mom, and I'm sorry," I said quickly, trying to keep at bay the horrible dullness that always came after the injection. "I'm going to try to be better, to be a better daughter from now on." Dad got up with a grunt and gazed down at me. "You're just very sick, Laura. Your mom and I are working very hard to cure you," he said mechanically. The good old lies to justify their torture, that somehow I needed to be tied down and abused like an animal in order to cure a sickness I didn't have. One time as a young girl, I pleaded with my mother to tell me the name of my disease. She laughed humorlessly and said, "You don't want to know?" Then swept out of my room, carrying aloft my reeking bedpan. "Please don't kill me." The words spilled out along with my tears, and now I wasn't faking it. "I don't want to die. Please." He stared at me, that same old look tempered with something else. Pity? Anger? Finally he spoke, and his voice was raw. "I don't want you to die. But your mother." He stopped abruptly and then shook his head. "I'm sorry, love." He left, and I was alone with my despair. But in the middle of the night, he came back. I had sobbed until the numbness returned, and my mind was blank, empty of all thoughts, even those of my friend. At some point I fell asleep because something compelled me to open my eyes. The room was black, but I could make out a darker, bulky shape in the corner, breathing heavily. "Dad," I whispered. "You've never had real food before?" It was a statement, not a question. Both of us knew it. "No." He was holding something in a bowl, his hands trembling. I could smell it. It smelled like nothing I'd ever known before, but instinctively I knew it was good and right to eat. I thought of the blonde host of the cooking show on TV, slicing tomatoes and braising beef in a cast-iron skillet. My mouth watered. "Tomorrow might be your last day, and I don't think it's fair that you never." He paused to swallow and then continued in a fierce whisper, "That you've never been able to eat." My jaw ached with need. Dad put the bowl on the floor in front of me and stepped back. I was glad that I couldn't see his face in that moment. "Does Mom know?" "No." My arms were restrained, but it didn't matter. I ate as I had never eaten before in my life and licked the bowl clean. Dad stayed until I was finished. I knew he was crying from the shaky sounds of his breathing. He said nothing else, only took the empty bowl and shuffled away. Mom found out the next day. She came in the morning to draw my blood and froze in the doorway. Then she backed out of my room, still staring, and pulled the door shut. I heard her screaming for my father. I licked at the corner of my mouth and listened. "What have you done?" I had never heard so much rage in my mother's voice. "She knows, Alice. She's not stupid. Besides, it was only from the butcher. I didn't. There's a chance it could have worked. And now you've gone, and..." I began to inspect the thick straps encircling my arms and legs and chest. I hadn't received my injection yet, and that coupled with my first meal left me unusually alert. I was able to work my fingers under one of the restraints on my arm and began searching up and down for any weaknesses. The door burst open, startling me. Mom stood there panting heavily. Her hair was in disarray and her eyes were bloodshot. She closed the door behind her and locked it from the inside. In her hand was a syringe, larger than normal, filled with a milky liquid. "What did your dad tell you?" she demanded. I looked back at her silently. For the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid. "There is a chance that this could really help you," she continued, gesturing with the syringe. "It's dangerous, yes, but if it works, you'll be able to live a more normal life. Although now that your father has gone and fed you, it might not be as effective." She fell silent for a moment, deep in thought. When she spoke again, her voice was softer and tears shimmered in her eyes. I looked away, repulsed by this parody of tenderness. "Laura, I understand why you hate us. You never asked for any of this, and we never gave you a choice. That's what parents do for their children. They do what is best. But now you're an adult. Well, almost 18 in 3 days. My little girl, all grown up, She smiled strangely through her tears. So now it's up to you. If you don't want the treatment, I won't give it to you. Your choice. But if that's your decision, then you will never leave this room again. You will die here. Why do you hate me so much? I finally asked. Sweetheart, your father and I are the only people in the world who don't hate you, she responded, coldness creeping back in her voice. She stared off into the distance, and her mouth twisted as though she were trying not to be sick. I remember the way you just tore into that little girl, and her mother was screaming, and you looked up with blood all over your face and just smiled up at us, so pleased with yourself. She was lost in her own memories and wasn't looking at me, and the hand holding the syringe was limp by her side. It was now or never. Bracing myself against the pain, I wrenched my arm out of the encircling strap and seized her by the wrist. She squawked in alarm and pulled back, and then that needle was heading towards my eye. I twisted my body away, and her momentum carried her forward, and the syringe shattered against the wall. Her throat was inches above my mouth, and I could see her pulse hammering away. I could smell her too. She smelled like last night's meal, sweet and nourishing. My hunger surged. My father's poor offering the night before was a pale imitation of the magnificent feast my mother presented me. With each warm, quivering mouthful, I could feel life flooding through my blood and bones, my muscles strengthening and the pain fading from my joints. Strange that a heart as cold and hardened as hers could be so tender against my tongue. I ate quickly and then turned to the rest of my restraints. My teeth had sharpened enough by now that I could tear through them with relative ease. Then I got to my feet, marveling at the ability to move freely for the first time in my life, and stepped out of my prison. I found myself walking down a long hallway, at the end of which was a brightly lit room filled with glass tubes and buzzing machines. My father was sitting inside, staring at a small screen. When he looked up and saw me standing there, he rose so quickly that he stumbled into a shelf and fell hard. He didn't even try to struggle as my mother had, just lay there with a stain spreading across the front of his pants and gazed up at me. Please, he said, please. I would have let him go, except I recognized the look in his eyes. It was the same look that had been there after he punched me and while he watched me eat the cow heart. No sympathy, no recognition, no love. Fear and hatred. There was never love. There was nothing in the house for me. The rest of the food I found was tasteless and did not satisfy my appetite. There wasn't much else besides a number of rooms housing scientific equipment and 2 small bedrooms. I decided not to investigate further and burned the whole damn place to the ground. I'll give them one thing, though. My parents built their twisted laboratory far away from any sort of human dwelling, I suppose to keep my suffering a secret from the world. The building was on the edge of vast pine forest, and the trees have become my refuge for the past few weeks. I sleep on the soft moss, unencumbered by any restraints, and bird song wakes me up in the morning. The squirrels, rabbits, and occasional deer ensure that I do not starve. But I've been thinking more and more about my long-gone childhood friend and the happiness I felt with her. The other day, I saw a group of people my age pass by, crashing through the trees and laughing with each other. I hid and watched them. They were happy and carefree. I wanted friends like that. Besides, I'm getting tired of squirrel. I want to try some birthday cake. 4th story. There is something unexplainable in the forests of Oklahoma. The United States is, no doubt, a diverse land of many different forms of life. From the fierce grizzly bears in the mountains of Alaska to the stealthy alligators in the swamps of Florida. Wherever you may be, there is always something unique about your state. That is until you get to Oklahoma. You see, Oklahoma is without a doubt one of the most boring places, maybe ever. Having lived here for 18 years, I'll be the first person to tell you that. Sure, there are large cities just like any other civilization. However, they are spread out over tens, even hundreds of miles apart. What you are left with in between those cities is what some refer to as the sticks or the boondocks or the country, whatever you choose to call it. And that is where I'm from. In the sticks, it consists of four main elements: lots of trees, lots of crops, lots of wildlife, and the occasional Walmart or Dollar General. Since there is not a lot to do out here, that is where most Oklahoma residents take up the pastime of hunting, and that is where my story begins. It was a cold November night, right in the heart of deer season. I was laying in bed enjoying a video game I was playing when there was a knock on my bedroom door. It opened and my dad walked in. "Hey, kid," he said. "Yes, Dad. You haven't been hunting this season yet. Why don't you take my bow, and I'll get you set up, and in the morning you can head out there and go kill us something." Wow, he's really putting me on the spot here. I thought to myself, yeah, sure, why not? I said to him he told me to dress warm and to meet him outside by the front door in 10 minutes so we could walk out to the spot so I would know where to go when it was time to leave tomorrow. We began our walk into the woods. With every step we took, I began to get a little bit more annoyed. Where are we going? I thought we were just going to go behind the house. I didn't know we were going to have to hike to the hunting spot. Damn, was I thinking I should have just said no. When we finally arrived at the hunting spot, we were more than a mile out into the wilderness behind my house. He finally stopped by a huge oak tree and pointed his flashlight at some cedar trees that were off to the side. "Do you see it?" he said. "No," I replied. He walked closer and shined his flashlight into the trees to reveal a tiny chair that was hidden under some tree branches and sticks. "That is where you're going to set up in the morning. Got that?" I nodded my head as he tossed out some dried corn to attract the deer in the morning when I came back. "What time do I need to head out here?" I asked my dad, expecting him to say 6 to 7 a.m. He then muttered, "You need to be up and ready to head out by 4 a.m. My heart sank. It was going to be pitch black outside. There's no way I was going to be able to make it all the way out here in the pitch black. We finally made it back to the house by 11:30, and I headed up to my room to get as much sleep as possible before this hunting trip. I awoke to the painful sound of my alarm blaring into my dark room. I looked at my phone, and it was 3:40 a.m. I sighed and sat up. I put on the warmest clothes I could find and made my way out into the living room. There on the couch sat my dad's bow, 2 arrows, and a small but sharp hunting knife. I grabbed the gear plus a flashlight and made my way out the front door. Navigating the woods at night was an extremely frightening experience that took much longer than what I would have wished. I left my house at 4 a.m., and I did not arrive at the hunting location until 4:37. I was impressed with just how many trees I managed to walk into and how many times I almost tripped over large logs, even with the help of my flashlight. Once I arrived, I sat down in the little uncomfortable plastic chair and began waiting. My dad wanted me out here so early because it makes it a lot easier for the hunter to sneak into his spot and the deer not being able to watch him. I'll never forget the paranoia I experienced in those woods in the pitch black. The feeling of not wanting to breathe too loud because something or someone might hear you is like no other. After roughly 15 minutes of sitting in the quiet darkness, I heard it, sticks snapping and leaves crunching. It was a deer walking to my spot. My heart began to pound as I listened closer. The leaves continued to crunch with each footstep, but that's when I picked up on something strange. Is this thing walking on 2 legs? I thought to myself. It sounded just like a pair of human legs walking through the leaves. Is it my dad? I thought. Maybe I forgot something at the house. Surely it has to be him. But no, it couldn't have been him. The footsteps were coming from the woods, not the trail we walked. The footsteps emerged from the woods and stopped. After a short pause, it took 1 step towards me. A moment later, it took 1 more step in my direction. I began to get nervous. Deer shouldn't be acting this way. What the hell is this thing? I raised my flashlight up from my lap, and in a moment of pure bravery and stupidity, I clicked my flashlight on. What I saw in front of me still haunts me to this very day. In front of me stood a creature no shorter than 10 feet tall. It stood on two legs. It was covered in black fur. The face was human, I believe. The face looked to be of a man's face. The eyes were closed, and the mouth was contorted into a sinister grin. It had two great big antlers that seemed to come off of an elk or a moose. It had hooves for feet, and its arms were long and skinny, but had what appeared to be claws on the end of its hands. As soon as I saw this thing, I clicked off my flashlight, praying it didn't see me. Too late. I almost started gagging from fear when I heard this thing sprinting at me. As fast as I could, I loaded an arrow and drew back the bow. Without hesitation, I fired the bow into the darkness, hoping I could hit the creature, but I missed. I heard the arrow whistle off into the woods before striking a tree. Shit, stupid idea, I thought. I immediately stood up and began sprinting down the trail. The creature was in close pursuit. I ran faster than I knew I could down this trail. When I was almost halfway home, I began to naturally run slower because of fatigue, and that's when it swiped at me. It hit me directly in my right calf. I stumbled and fell off the trail and into a nearby ditch. Once I fell in, I could immediately feel the warm blood begin to start gushing out of my leg. I quickly tore off my hoodie and wrapped it around my leg as a temporary tourniquet. However, my bleeding leg was the least of my worries. The creature jumped down into the ditch with great force and began swiping at the ground, hoping to hit me. Luckily, the thing landed about 20 feet away from me, so I had some time to spare. I hurriedly pulled out my flashlight and threw it behind the creature. Upon hearing the flashlight hit the leaves, it turned around and began swiping at the ground once again. As quickly and quietly as possible, I crawled out of the ditch. On my way out, I heard the creature begin to make a clicking noise from its mouth. Now I can't confirm it, but I assumed that noise was the creature using echolocation to find me. If this thing is blind, how did it see my flashlight back at the hunting spot? I thought. Then I realized I had to click my flashlight on, and the creature probably heard that. Despite now knowing it was using audio to track me, I still ran to the best of my ability out of the woods. The thing didn't follow me out. I made it home and crashed to my front door, bleeding all over the place. My parents took me to the ER to get stitched up. They asked me what happened, and I told them what happened, but of course they didn't believe me. They assumed I fell while walking through the woods and tore open my leg somehow. And after a while I began to think the same thing. Maybe I was sleepwalking and fell. Maybe I was hallucinating. Who knows, is what I used to tell myself. I almost forgot about my experience until today. My dad went out hunting and was supposed to be back 3 hours ago. Me and my mother began to get worried. I walked out my front door. I planned on going to look for my dad, and that's when I heard it, screaming. I don't know if it was my dad's or if it was just a wild animal, but we called the police anyway. And as I type this, I can hear a faint clicking out by the woods, and if I look hard enough, I think I can make out a human face looking up at my window. Please, if you are ever in the forests of Oklahoma, be extra quiet. You never know who or what is going to hear you. Fifth story. There's something inhuman south of Seattle if you want to go looking for it. I've talked about my road trip on this board before. Sick to death of working myself to death, I took the first vacation of my life last year. A beat-up, rebuilt Yamaha Zuma and a foolish sense of optimism carried me across the western United States on an adventure that seriously made me rethink everything I thought I knew about the world. I loved Seattle, with the hip, original hippie neighborhoods and the perma-carnival atmosphere of Pike Place Market. The bridge troll was a highlight. Gotta love a city that sees a bridge and goes, you know what this needs? A giant concrete troll. Getting out of Seattle, however, was a total nightmare. Restricted to back roads by a motor that capped at 40 miles an hour, I must have gotten lost a dozen times despite all the help I received from baffled gas station attendants. So I was behind schedule when it came to finding my campsite. Some miles south and a little east of the city, there's a free campground. It's most often used by horse riders, and boy, can you smell it. That's actually what guided me in the last few miles. There's a gravel road off of a service road, and then a few crooked, unpaved paths off of that. The trail markers were all bent, broken, or faded. In the end, I had to follow my nose. I set up my junior scout tent in the fading twilight. Mine was the only one there. I had the place all to myself. After a quick meal of apples pilfered from a previous campground, I did my usual travel log spiel to my video camera by lantern light before turning in. I'm not sure how long I slept. I know I checked the time, but I'll be damned if I can recall what it was. Something had disturbed my well-earned beauty rest, but I was too groggy to remember what it had been. I sat in a stupor, too alert to fall back asleep, but too sleepy to be totally awake. Something brushed the side of my tent, and suddenly I was more awake than I'd ever been. I had done plenty of camping by that point. I was familiar with the sounds of the usual nighttime critters, from raccoons to coyotes. Nothing had ever bothered me in my tent before, just snuffled around camp before wandering off and leaving me be. From the sound of the footsteps, it was walking on two legs. That was a first. My mind immediately jumped to the worst possible conclusion: bear. There's a lot of conflicting information out there about how to deal with bears, and a lot of it depends on the type of bear. Sitting there in the dark with my heart beating in my throat, I had no way of telling which species I was dealing with. Shout out or play dead. I was 30 yards from a sturdy cement block outhouse that might be better shelter. As quietly as I dared, I slipped my boots on and got ready to dash. The tent zipper seemed impossibly loud in the night as I worked it open centimeter by centimeter. I moved agonizingly slowly. Once outside, I craned my neck around to see if the bear, if that's what it was between me and the outhouse. With the incredible illumination of the Milky Way, I could see the campground clearly all the way to the tree-line. There was nothing out there. I could feel something watching me. It was like feeling an insect crawl along the back of my neck. There was no logical way for me to know something had its eyes on me, but out there in the dark, in the middle of nowhere all alone, I couldn't dismiss it. Still on high alert, I crept along and tried not to crunch the gravel under my feet too loudly. The outhouse was still my best bet. The door was propped open by a stone, but inside there was a heavy-duty bolt lock. I would have to spend the night surrounded by the smell of not only horse but also human poop, but I figured that was a fair trade for not getting mauled or eaten. My hand was on the latch when I heard the awful crunch of footsteps in gravel behind me. I kicked the stone propping the door open out of the way and slammed the heavy metal door shut, no longer caring how much noise I made. Whatever was on the other side had thumbs. Something tugged on the door as I struggled to bolt it shut. I won, but it was close. There was a metal mesh along the top of the structure for ventilation. Through it, I heard the bellows of heavy breathing that matched my own. My phone was back in my tent because I am an idiot. There was no way to tell time. The same stupid impulse that brought me out there in the first place kicked in. I had to know. Hello. Silence. Maybe they hadn't heard me. And then, hello. I could have shit myself. I was in the right place for it. The voice was feminine like my own, and the sound of it was a kick to the gut. I couldn't even tell you why it made me so uneasy. The sensation was like when you're walking upstairs and you're expecting another step, but your foot comes down on empty space. I'm sorry, I thought I was alone. I said, I'm alone. Every syllable was jarring. I'm sorry I freaked out. I didn't think there was anyone else here. Sorry. I'm here. You'd think now that I knew it was another camper I would have opened the door, but I never did. Some deeply buried instinct kept me from taking my hand off the bolt. You scared the crap out of me. Are there more tent sites out in the trees or something? I'm something. There are more. Her words made me sick to my stomach. Again, I couldn't have even told you why, only that they did. From her odd syntax, I guessed English wasn't her first language. Do you need to go? Use the bathroom, I mean. Because I'm going to be in here a while. That wasn't a lie. I wouldn't have opened that door if it was my own mother on the other side. You need to go. Her grasp of English was improving with every sentence. There was something weird about that. Look, I'm sorry if I scared you, but you started it by creeping around in the dark. I won't come out. Can you go somewhere else? I'll be gone in the morning, I promise. I just wanted to sleep in peace. You need to be gone. I promise you I creep in the dark. You won't be here in the morning. Fear cemented my mouth shut. The more I spoke, the more she did, and I didn't want to hear her voice anymore. I'm sure that makes me sound like a bigot or something, but I had the feeling I was feeding words to her, and the feeling was not pleasant. It felt like she was hungry for them. The same instinct that told me to keep quiet the first time kept me from running my dumb mouth off again. I was either dealing with someone who was not mentally well or with something else entirely. There was a threat in her words or the way she spoke them, and I had no doubt she would be able to carry out that threat. I kept my hands on the bolt while they cramped, and the first rays of sun crept sluggishly through the mesh at the top of the walls of my shelter. It wasn't until the sun was strong enough to make me sweat in my self-imposed prison that I felt brave, stupid, enough to speak again. Hello? Are you still out there? Hello? Anyone? There was no answer, which was the best outcome I could hope for. I opened the door. My tent was untouched, at least from a distance. The oppressive feeling of being watched had dissipated. I dressed and broke down camp in record time. My moped cranked to life, but it wasn't until I went to put my helmet on that I saw the footprint. I'd kicked the rock pretty far. It was close to my bike. Naturally, I went over to it. I had to know. In a clear outline of fresh mud, there was a single print on the smooth gray of the stone. Not human, but a hoof like that of an unshod horse or goat. It was so fresh, so vivid. It hadn't been there last night when I used the bathroom before I'd gone to bed. In the soft mud in front of the outhouse door were more of the same, some of them on top of my own boot prints. If you want to go looking for whatever the hell it was, be my guest. Just be careful with your words out there. Because I figured out what was wrong with that voice when I watched the playback of my travelogue video. 6th story. I filmed a scary video for TikTok, and something has been wrong since. For those of you who don't watch TikTok, there's been a trend going around with some creepy doppelganger videos. The video usually starts with a person doing something normal, with an audio that says something like, if you see another person that looks identical to you, run away and hide. Then it'll cut to a creepy duplicate of said person, usually peeking from a closet or around the corner. I don't really make videos that often, but this looked like a trend I'd have a little bit of fun with. So about a week ago, I made my own video. My friends and I were having a couple drinks while one of them helped me film the duplicate part. We all laughed a little bit about the end part and how creepy I looked, but something about it unsettled me a little bit more than it should have. I just had this pit in my gut, an overwhelming sense of dread that made me nauseous. The night eventually ended, and my friends went home for the night. I took my dog out one last time, and then laid down for bed and turned my TV on for background noise. I tossed and turned for a while, still a bit on edge, but I eventually dozed off to a random King of the Hill episode. I woke up to static coming from my TV. I shifted my eyes to look at the time. 3:06 a.m., the bright alarm clock beamed. I heard my closet door slowly creak open. My eyes darted toward the door, and my body and limbs trembled in fear, but were unable to move. I watched in horror as I saw a hand begin to creep out from the closet and wrapped itself around the doorframe. My heart began beating faster, and my breathing became rapid. The creature slowly started crawling from its hiding space. The light from the TV illuminated a wide, toothy grin as the face came more into focus. To my horror, the person hiding in my closet was a duplicate version of me, except she had dark circles under her eyes and a smile too wide to be human. Her eyes were glassy and dead. There was also something off about her, something dark. She stood at the foot of my bed, just smiling and staring down at me. She waved at me, and at that moment I shot up in bed, pouring sweat and gasping for air. My duplicate no longer there. My dog whined and licked my face to try to calm me. But even with her there, I didn't feel safe. I told myself it was just sleep paralysis, but I was still disturbed. I tried to go about my day as best as I could. The next morning, however, I couldn't explain what I found. I walked into the kitchen to grab some breakfast and saw a note on the counter in my handwriting. It read, "I will replace you. I am the better you," over and over again. I was terrified. No, I still am terrified because I couldn't recall writing anything like that. I called my friend, and she tried to reassure me that I was just a little freaked out because of the nightmare I had, and that maybe I had written the note half asleep and just didn't remember it. It didn't really help. In fact, it made me feel like I was losing my mind, and maybe I am, but something happened a couple nights ago that made me get a hotel. I awoke to a loud crash coming from inside my house. My dog was barking and growling like crazy, so I grabbed the baseball bat from my closet that I keep for, just in case, and began tiptoeing down the hallway. I flipped the light switch, but the light wouldn't come on. I peered down the hall as my eyes adjusted to the darkness. In the dim moonlight streaming in from the window, I could see my utility closet at the end of the hallway was open. My blood turned to ice as I called out into the dark. If anyone's in here, just know I'm calling the police." I stammered out. I heard a small chuckle come from the closet, and then my voice, called my dog's name, and I watched in shock as my dog darted out from behind me and stopped in front of the door, her body tense with fear as she let out a low growl. "Nyla, no!" I screamed, but I was too late. A pair of arms reached out from the closet and grabbed Nyla, pulling her into the closet. The door slammed shut as she yelped. I sprinted toward the door and frantically tried to open it, but it wouldn't budge. I turned to run and grab my phone to call 911, and I heard the door swing open behind me. Out walked my husky, seemingly unharmed. I rushed toward the closet and pulled the cord for the light, but the closet was empty except for the HVAC and water heater. I didn't want to stay in that house any longer, so I grabbed a few things in Nyla and checked into a hotel nearby where I've been staying since. I don't know what to do. I can't go back to that house by myself, and Nyla hasn't been acting right. She's been growling at me, and even bit my arm the other day, and I had to get stitches. I don't understand. She's never been aggressive before. It's like it's not her anymore. I took her to the vet yesterday, and they said she's physically in perfect condition, but there's something not quite right about her eyes. It's like she's staring straight through me. 7th story. My daughter writes scary stories. My daughter used to see me reading no-sleep stories and asked me to read to her. That's when her obsession with horror began. I found a story that was tame and dumbed it down so she could understand it. I thought it would still scare her, but the whole time she had a huge smile on her face. So I kept reading to her. Usually 1 story a day, but sometimes I'll dangle a 2nd story as an incentive for her to behave. A lot of your posts get a little gruesome, so most of the time I'll add in Scooby-Doo and a few more hijinks and less bloody murder to make it a little more child-friendly, so she is only slightly spooked but still enthralled. When I got a new laptop for work, I wiped the memory. I made sure to uninstall all of the browsers too, so she couldn't use the internet, just in case she figured out how to connect Wi-Fi. That way she could play games like Freddy Fish or Pajama Sam, and I don't have to worry about her going onto the internet and stumbling upon something she shouldn't. She started using the laptop to write her own short horror stories. Every time she finished a story, she would email me by printing them out and putting them in an envelope she wrote a big E on and handing them to me. She would always beg me to drop whatever I was doing to read it. Whenever I finished, she would always ask if her story had scared me, but I never had the heart to tell her that her stories were more adorable than scary. They were mostly about princesses getting taken by bad guys or kittens fighting off monsters, and almost all of her stories had Scooby-Doo in them. Like father, like daughter, I suppose. Even though I obviously wasn't spooked, I would always tell her that she scared me, and she would always respond the same way. No way. Daddies aren't scared of anything. Now I'm certain any parent out there can tell you that is a load of shit. We're afraid of so many things. I'm afraid of losing my job, so I can't provide for my family, or something bad happening to my wife or daughter. I remember back when she was first born, it drove me crazy whenever my wife would turn her back on the cart when she was in it. I was paranoid that someone would snatch my little girl right out of the cart. After all, whenever a child gets kidnapped, they always say, "I only looked away for a minute." The day came when one of my daughter's stories actually did scare me. It's kind of hard to explain it, so I'll just post the story. It went like this. Sherry's boyfriend went out and bought some magical pixie dust. He gave the pixie dust to Sherry and told her it was sugar. He was lying to her. Sherry was so excited that she ate a whole bunch with her nose. Then she started dancing. Then she started twitching. Then she died. No one ever found out what Sherry's boyfriend did. The fact that someone died in one of her stories was off-putting enough, but to obviously reference a drug overdose was not a normal thing for a 7-year-old to write about. When I finished reading the story, my daughter was looking up at me with her big grin asking, "Did I scare you?" I tried asking her where she heard this story, but she insisted she made it up. She grabbed my arm and kept asking me if she scared me. For a first time since she started writing, I honestly told her yes. "No way, daddies aren't scared of anything," she said, and she skipped off to go play. I showed the story to my wife, and she looked at me with a scowl, scolding me for reading our daughter so many scary stories off of the internet. I told her that I'd never read her a story like this, and that I have never read her a story where someone died. I asked my wife if it was possible that our daughter had seen it on a TV show she left on. My wife said that she hadn't watched any adult shows without me in weeks. I was convinced that my daughter must have seen this story on TV, that my wife was just out of the room, or maybe someone at her school gave her the idea. I kept racking my brain, trying to come up with an answer, but when she wrote another story a couple days later, and it was back to her usual subject matter, I decided to let it go. About a week later, my wife texted me a link to a news site. A young girl named Cheryl died of a heroin overdose. Apparently, she got the heroin from her boyfriend, who told her it was coke. The article said her death was being labeled as an accident and that her boyfriend wouldn't be charged at this time. It didn't take long for me to make the connection. Someone must have left the news on, and my daughter heard this story. It's possible that she didn't even know that this story was her inspiration. She just remembers an event. I thought about trying to talk to her about drugs and the story again, but she was her usual self. So if the story is just a story to her, I didn't want her to make a connection to some horrible real event. More stories came, all standard fare. I would tell her that these stories are much better and much scarier than that Sherry story. It seemed like we were moving past everything until she wrote another really scary story. Danny was bored, so he stole a car. Danny was a bad boy. He didn't realize that the car belonged to a bad man. When the bad man found Danny, he shot Danny in the head. Then the bad man drove away. This story was worse than the first one. The somewhat childlike wording of the first story softened the blow and made it a bit easier to process. This story had no padding. It was there in your face. Shot Danny in the head. I never thought I would hear those words from my little girl. My daughter was still just looking up at me with her big green eyes, waiting for me to say what I always said. I asked her where she heard this story, but just like she did with the Sherry story, she insisted she made it up. I told her that the story was mean and that she shouldn't write stories like this anymore. She argued with me, and I ended up grounding her from writing. The next day, I had to work late. I was waiting for my partner to finish a bit that I needed, so I thought I would take a second to see if I could find anything about my daughter's story. If she heard the first one on the news, she probably heard this one too. A little bit of Googling turned up a story about a boy named Daniel who was found dead near the interstate. The police thought it was a mugging gone wrong. Two things stuck out to me. One, Daniel had previously served time in juvie for grand theft auto. And two, he was shot in the head. I couldn't turn up any other stories with a victim named Danny, Dan, Daniel, or anything else that's similar. This had to have been the story she heard. The only problem was that the story was posted almost 24 hours after I read my daughter's story. That didn't make sense to me. I checked every news site I could find. They all said that Danny was killed the night after my daughter wrote the story about him. I went back and looked at the story about Sherry, and it was the same. They found Sherry dead 2 days after my daughter wrote that story. How did my daughter write a story so eerily similar to a real-world event before that event even happened? It had to have been a coincidence, right? I was quiet when I went home that night, and so was my daughter. My wife told me that my daughter was sick and asked me if I was feeling under the weather as well. I told her that I was, which wasn't technically a lie, since I was feeling sick. I just don't think the pain in my stomach and the tightness in my chest had anything to do with the virus my daughter had. The next day at work was a fog for me, but I ended up getting out of work on time for once. When I got home, I noticed that my daughter's laptop was on the kitchen counter, and my wife seemed to be in a very bad mood. When I asked about the laptop, my wife told me that since our daughter was sick in bed, my wife gave her the laptop so she could pass the time, but my wife had to take the laptop from her, and she isn't allowed to write any more stories. I asked her why she was so on edge, even though the answer was obvious. My wife pulled a crumpled piece of paper out of the trash can and handed it to me. She wrote another story, and I completely understand why my wife didn't want her writing anymore. Even typing it here makes my chest tighten up like crazy. Daddy got mad. Daddy tied me and Mommy up downstairs in the basement. I'm fine. I'm hungry and thirsty. Daddy brought my t-ball bat and hit Mommy with it until she stopped moving. After Daddy left, Mommy made scary noises for a while. Mommy hasn't made any noise in a while, though. Daddy hasn't stopped crying since Mommy stopped moving. I hope Mommy and Daddy feel better. Thanks a lot for watching the video. Till the end, subscribe to Horror in Detail for more videos. Drop your suggestions in comment section.